And there's quite a significant neurological transition through the perimenopause. But what's really interesting is the brain adapts. And after the menopause, we see like these changes take place and they all kind of level out because the brain is adaptable and is resilient, seems to be sometimes more resilient than its owners. The brain is resilient and can adapt to these kinds of changes. And so what we actually see, this is the coolest thing, during perimenopause, we see actually an increase in grey matter in women's brains.
Welcome to Midlife Unraveled, the podcast that takes you on a journey through the twists and turns of midlife. I'm your host, Anita Gilbert, and I've transitioned from the corporate world of investment banking to become the proud owner of a yoga and Pilates studio. Together, we're going to navigate the exhilarating roller coaster that is midlife. Each episode, we dive deep with a seasoned expert to rediscover and redefine how to live our best during this life-changing period. Join us every Tuesday for new episodes, brimming with wisdom, insights, inspiration, and a laugh along the way. So strap in, because Midlife Unraveled is about to redefine the way you embrace midlife. Subscribe today and take this journey with us. Today, we welcome Dr. Sarah McKay, neuroscientist and author of 2 books. We have a fabulous conversation and I think you'll love it, both informative and funny in equal parts. I hope you enjoy. I am so pleased to welcome you to Midlife Unraveled.
Oh, thanks for the invitation.
So, Sarah, as a neuroscientist, author of 2 books, Baby Brain and the Women's Brain book, and founder of the Neuroscience Academy, you're definitely the best person to speak to on this topic. And I'm really excited today that we can delve into the subject of neuroscience. Here, we're talking about the science behind our midlife brains, so we can discover what changes are taking place and the impact that these changes have on our day-to-day life. So let's start with the changes. What is going on in our brains in midlife?
In midlife, well, I assume you're talking about midlife women.
Absolutely.
Midlife men.
They're a totally different topic.
Yeah, so I suppose we're still quite vague about the definitions of midlife. And as a kind of a sort of a developmental stage, it's quite understudied. And in my second book, Baby Brain, which is not necessarily about midlife, I did talk about, brains aging gracefully, and I specifically started off talking about how there is quite a lack of research, broadly speaking, for humans, typically at this point in time, and it's quite a vaguely defined point in time. I believe the most recent survey that was done, the most recent Australian Women's Health Survey that was done, defined midlife as kind of 45 through to 65.
Okay.
But it doesn't really have a specific kind of definition. And typically it's kind of just ends up being a cliche. It's all about a crisis. I think there's more opportunity than crisis, but we can delve into that.
I'm so glad you said that.
Many thoughts on that. Many thoughts.
Yeah, look, I'm so glad you said that, because I see midlife for women as a real power phase. And I feel like there's so much out there that it's a negative, so much negative, menopause is this and everything's bad and it's all it's all looking just downhill from here. Whereas I'm thinking, let's reframe that. Let's change the dialogue around that.
I think that's the message we've done. We've done this whole podcast now. I think what I am seeing more and more, and I think on one hand it is great that there are more open discussions. And if we're going to talk about midlife in women, it's hard to not talk about menopause, but there's so much else going on apart from this kind of biological shift within our bodies.
Yeah.
But I feel like we're at this point where we just are only talking about our problems as if they're kind of intractable, overwhelming. There's some force out there that's created this awful situation in which we unwittingly find ourselves and we just have no agency. And that's really disempowering. Now, I have to be careful because I I'm quite a high agency person, and I always have been, so I'm aware not everyone is. And I don't want to come across as arrogant in that respect, because it's very easy to do so when I don't mean to. But I do feel that a lot of the conversations that are being had at the moment, we're only talking about and emphasising where we're disempowered and what's going wrong.
Exactly.
And what is overwhelming, rather than there being opportunities for empowerment, opportunities for resilience building, and just opportunities for moving into this next phase of life with kind of wisdom and grace.
Exactly.
Instead
and
of
confidence.
and confidence, not just whining about what's wrong.
Exactly. I do feel like there's a certain piece out there that the more we understand, the more knowledgeable we are, and the more in control we can feel about what's happening in our lives, in our bodies, and everything else. And then we see the opportunities. Okay, menopause is happening. That's huge, huge for so many women. But what can we do to make this better? What can we do to mean that it doesn't impact us quite so negatively, quite so much? And also, I feel like you take the power into your hands with knowledge, and then with options available, you can actually make those changes.
Yeah, I kind of feel like if you've got to 50, you haven't kind of figured out how to stand up for yourself, and not like just take everything as this, kind of overwhelming, malevolently created circumstance.
Yes.
Mate, well, you're going to wait till you're 60. I'm not sure. We wouldn't encourage our daughters going through puberty to just see it as this kind of catastrophe that they're about to experience. We wouldn't be talking as we experience pregnancy and motherhood for the first time, only focusing in on the downsides. That's why I wrote a whole book on pregnancy and motherhood and the upsides. So
I love it.
I think that education is super important. I think advocacy sometimes can create, and I have lots of thoughts about advocacy versus education and health and science communication. I think the more we talk, the better, but I think we've got to have the right conversations that are informed.
Exactly. I feel like there's a lot of kind of hearsay opinions floating around, and it's great to have the facts, which is why I'm so excited to speak to you.
Well, I have facts and
a woman
opinions.
of facts.
I'll try to stick with the facts, not so much of the opinions. I have
all right.
both.
As long as we know which is which, we're all good.
Yeah.
So let's get back to our question. We could chat here for hours, I think. What are the changes that are happening in our brain around this time of life?
Well, I think it's easiest if we talk about the changes that are taking place in menopause, because we can't subtract menopause out from conversations about what's happening.
And that is obviously so influential.
Yeah, because this, like puberty, like pregnancy, we go through these enormous shifts. And I always take, and I'm very firm on this, a biopsychosocial approach, in that our bodies and, our physiology is changing. We go through an enormous neurological shift. We go through social shifts. We go through psychological shifts in self-identity. Changes are happening in our body and our perceptions of the world around us, and in our psychology. If we look specifically at menopause in the brain, and that's perhaps where where my kind of expertise lies.
Yes.
There are changes that are taking place that are due to these hormonal shifts, some of which we understand quite well, and some changes that we don't really understand at all. So perhaps if I talk through what we understand first, and then I can describe some of the changes that we don't really kind of know what they mean. But there may potentially be upsides to the ones that we don't know about. So when we look, and it's probably most common to talk about the symptoms, even though I don't always like talking about all of the things that go wrong. But let's take the line that around a quarter of women experience no symptoms going through menopause at all. Around a quarter of a woman will experience symptoms that they find troublesome or interfere with their day-to-day life. And there's even debate around the word troublesome at the moment, but let's set that aside. The symptoms affect you so much that it is impacting your day-to-day life. Let's just say that. And then you've got 50% of women in the middle who kind of might experience symptoms, may just not experience them, and they don't worry them. They're just kind of in the middling. So what we understand most clearly about the shifts that are taking place in the brain are around some of these more irksome, troublesome symptoms, particularly issues around thermoregulation. And my theory is that some of the issues around thermoregulation kind of cause a bit of the domino effects of some of the other symptoms we might see, in particular issues with sleep, and then some of the knock-on effects of that, issues around emotion regulation, anxiety, depression, mood kind of changes, etc. And it's very clearly established in terms of the ovarian brain conversation that starts to falter during the perimenopause, so during the years leading up to menopause. And that is because we run out of eggs. Some months there might be a healthy egg or two or three, some months there might be none. And the brain and the ovaries have been in constant conversation since you hit puberty, unless you've been pregnant or unless you've been on the pill. And every month, the ovaries signal up to the brain. They send a message up to the brain to a specific part of the brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is very busy. It receives a lot of information from the body and the rest of the brain, but a lot of information about sort of the state of our body, the state of our physiology. What is our body temperature? What is our hormone level? What is the pH in our blood? What is our breathing rate, etc., etc. And it's receiving signals from the ovaries about estrogen levels. And then when it receives that signal, it sends a signal back down to the ovaries. During perimenopause, sometimes the ovaries release heaps of estrogen. And the brain goes, not that much. And then the next month, the ovaries go, okay, sorry. And then the brain says, sorry, can't hear you. And the next month, the ovaries go, oh, sorry. And they sort of have this kind of crazy conversation, which leads to these roller coastering levels of hormones that are quite dysregular. Much not like that kind of nice chatty little conversation that it's been going on for like the prior sort of 40 years. And it's that kind of roller coastering of hormones that has a knock-on effect on the kind of the wiring of the hypothalamus, and in particular the wiring of the part of the hypothalamus that controls our body temperature. Okay, so normally there's a set point, hot, cold. When you get too hot, you sweat, you feel hot, you take your clothes off. So your body responds physiologically to being too hot, and you also respond behaviorally, and you also respond kind of cognitively in that, oh gosh, I'm hot. I notice that I'm hot, okay? Same when you get cold. When you go through perimenopause, in many women, the top level shifts down. So your body temperature only needs to rise a slight amount until it kind of hits that top level in your thermostat, in your hypothalamus, and your brain goes, it's hot in here, it's hot in here, it's hot in here. And it sends this physiological response off. So you sweat and your blood vessels dilate to release heat from your body. And you might want to take your clothes off to cool down. And you go, oh my gosh, I'm hot. And so you have kind of a cognitive response to that. When you're asleep, the same happens. But sometimes because you're asleep, your brain needs to also wake you up to behave in a way that the physiological response might be there, but you also need to behave. You also need to throw the bed covers off. And sometimes when you're deeply asleep, your brain needs to really wake you up, so it sends off a little burst of kind of adrenaline. There's kind of a signal goes down to release, adrenaline from your adrenal glands to kind of wake you up. So women wake up, oh my God.
That startled awake. Yeah.
Startled awake. I think which is your brain waking you up, so you will cool yourself down. Because it is perceived a tiny increase in body temperature as kind of panic stations. So we know that estrogen helps that, because if you put estrogen back in, it helps regulate your body temperature. So that's reasonably well established.
Yeah.
Where I think some of the issues then come from, and this is debated in that it's not necessarily well established. The theory's there, but it doesn't always play out in terms of put estrogen back in and everything else stacks back up. But thermoregulation, body temperature, and sleep, and what we call sleep architecture, are like intimately entwined. And sleep architecture is those sort of phases of sleep you go through at night. Like you go down into deep sleep, then you get into lighter sort of REM, dreaming sleep, back down again, up again. And you should follow this nice kind of sequence through the night, this lovely pattern of sleep architecture. We can disrupt that by drinking too much. We can also disrupt that by being too hot or by being too cold. And anyone who is not menopausal, but you try and go to sleep on one of those hot summer Sydney nights if you haven't got air conditioning and you can't fall asleep and you have kind of crazy dreams because your thermoregulation has disrupted your sleep. You can't fall asleep or you wake up. And same if you're really, really cold, it's harder to fall asleep and also stay asleep because your thermoregulation is disrupting your sleep. So it's very highly likely that even women who aren't waking up in that panic because their brain has told them it's panic stations and it's hot in here and we need to cool down, that sleep architecture is disrupted. So even if they're not waking consciously, you're not getting that healthy pattern of sleep because your thermoregulation is kind of out of whack.
Can I just ask a question about that
Yeah.
architecture of sleep? That's fascinating what you were saying. So
Mm.
if you do wake up in one of those cycles, and if you do manage to go straight back to sleep, do you just plug straight back into where you were in the cycle, or does it it starts again, or how does that work?
Some people, typically, if you wake up, say you need to go to the bathroom, you need to go to the loo or something, you're mostly waking up in the second half of the night when your sleep cycles are lighter. You're far less likely to be waking up in the first half of the night when you're in that really, really deep sleep. And if you think back, if you've ever had a baby and you think back to when the baby used to wake you up 2 or 3 times at night, being woken up from that deep sleep in the early half of the night is like trying to swim through, swim out of a can. It's so hard to wake up because you're coming out of really deep sleep and you're not going to go straight back into that, especially if you're getting up to feed a baby. But if you're woken in the second half of the night, it wasn't as hard to wake up. It might still be annoying, but it was not as hard because you're not as deep. So it depends where you are. And if you're woken from that deep sleep and that deep sleep is constantly being disrupted, then that's when we're going to see more serious consequences on your health than if you're being woken in the second half of the night when you're in the lightest sleep. But if that's being disrupted night after night after night after night, and that happens to so many people for so many reasons. It happens to men as they're aging, as their prostates get bigger and they keep needing to get up and have a wee. It happens to new mothers or parents with new babies being constantly woken. So there's lots of reasons to have that sort of deep sleep and that healthy sleep architecture disrupted. And what happens if that happens one night, a week, a month, year? You can't emotionally regulate. You can't make as healthy choices. Physiologically, you're not functioning as well. Emotionally, you're not functioning as well. As soon as you're not functioning emotionally well, you're more likely to develop anxiety and depression. It's kind of one of the components of that ability to just be able to kind of make smart decisions. We just start to see everything else fall down. And it's very well established what happens when you have terrible sleep, metabolically, cognitively, emotionally, physically.
But I think it has so many impacts on so many other decisions that we make.
Yeah, for sure.
We all know when we've had a terribly late night or we've had that broken sleep.
I've got a really loud truck outside my window. Can you hear that?
Not really.
Oh, good. It's cancelling it. Thank goodness. Sorry about that.
That's right. So we can't. So often it's harder to make those good decisions in other aspects of our life. I mean, we're really tired. We don't feel like exercising. We're really tired. We're going to crave those sugary carbs to give us that lift. So all those other lifestyle decisions that we would have probably made much better choices are going south.
And if you have disrupted sleep or you don't feel rested when you wake up, that's kind of one component. Like if we take a biopsychosocial approach, or I say let's put the brain in the middle, look at what's happening from our bottom-up body, the outside-in world, and our top-down mind, because all of those, the brain is making meaning of all of that data that is coming in, all of those messages that are coming in, not just the body, but all of the rest of it. We can look at things like the development of say, insomnia, which is influenced by, you may have this physical inability to sleep well, which could be influenced by hormones and body temperature dysregulation. And then you're going to start feeling perhaps you are the kind of person that finds lack of sleep distressing. So then you go to bed and then you might be worrying about your sleep. And then that's another contributing factor. So you may end up with a form of insomnia, which was kick-started by the hormones and the thermoregulation, but then is sustained by other factors. So that's why sometimes what we see is that people who are experiencing disrupted sleep, when we treat with, say, menopause hormone therapy, they're not always seeing this immediate resumption of healthy sleep because they need to almost kind of go through that kind of cognitive behavioural therapy process of managing insomnia and going back to the basics of sleep hygiene and re-establishing everything again, learning to sleep well again. the same way we have to teach little babies to.
And we all know that feeling that if you've got that early wake-up call that you don't normally do, you can't sleep properly because you're so worried about,
Well, you have to get
about
up to go to
sleeping
the
through the
airport.
alarm. I know,
You think,
exactly. You're so
yeah, and you're
worried
like, oh, my
about it.
alarm's going off at 5, and you wake up at 2, and then you wake up at 3, and then you wake up at 4, and you go, oh, like,
Exactly.
no point going back now.
Exactly. And in the same way as if you have for so many years had trouble sleeping, you have that in your head. So I'm not a good sleeper. I'm not a good sleeper.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you won't be a
yeah,
good sleeper. So
yeah,
these menopause issues just on top of that can actually just be
yeah, yeah.
doubly debilitating.
Yeah, they can exacerbate the sleep issues, and the sleep issues can exacerbate, and so it becomes this chicken and egg, or this kind of,
Mm,
feedback loop. And our brains and our body, our brains function entirely on feedback loops. So they're constantly receiving data from our bodies and deploying information back down onto how to manage our physiology. And our minds are constantly making meaning of what is going on. We have, and we're receiving all of this information now, whether it's coming in through our phones. We're constantly expected not only to make meaning of the data that is streaming in from our phones about every crisis that is also happening out there in the world, we're also expected to have a fully formed, well-informed opinion on that, to have thought through that, to share that. There's an awful lot of expectation that we're placing on ourselves.
exactly.
And information that we're receiving that we're trying to make meaning of, whether it's about menopause or anything. That and the information we're receiving about menopause, we are making meaning of that, and that is influencing our experiences. And people seem to be finding that a controversial idea right now to accept. There has been this ongoing, I shouldn't say ongoing because it's only been going on for a few weeks now, quite a hullabaloo, let's just say, about some of the updates of the NICE or the UK menopause guidelines, because they're now also including CBT in those guideline updates, specifically for women who can't take hormone therapy as a way of helping them manage their symptoms, particularly their thermoregulation symptoms, their hot flashes.
So what's
Because
CBT?
we have evidence from clinical trials that's cognitive behavioural therapy. So how you're making meaning of your experience of your hot flash, particularly in a public setting, how you're making meaning of that helps you build resilience and helps you approach that in a different way. You might still experience it, but you might not find it as troubling.
Yeah.
And there has and the inclusion of that in those guidelines. Well, one, it was spun as they were replacing hormone therapy with CBT, which is absolutely not the case. CBT is also being included. So I'm not sure where the advocates have got that message from, but it's almost, and that is not telling people, that is not telling women these experiences you're having are all in your head and you're making them up and you can talk yourself out of them. Rather, it is recognizing, and I'm looking at this from a neuroscience perspective, that we've got a brain and the brain is receiving data and it is making meaning of that data. And some of the data that it is making meaning from is the messages we are receiving. We have well-established data on placebo effects and nocebo effects. So when you make meaning of information, that can influence a health experience. Yeah. That's not to say you're being told to think this and therefore you will experience it, but it is data your brain is making meaning of.
Yeah.
And in the same way, we can use our thoughts to help us perhaps perceive what is happening to ourselves in a different way.
Yeah. That's so fascinating. And before we move too much on, I had a question about the temperature. You said that our top temperature lifts slightly. What happens to the lower end of our comfort temperature?
Yeah,
Does
some
that
people
lift
get
as
more
well?
sensitive. Yeah, some people get more sensitive to cold as well, but it doesn't appear, not in the same. Some women do get more sensitive to cold, but it doesn't appear to be as troublesome.
Yeah,
And women aren't as sensitive to it. It definitely appears to be the hot, the kind of the heat that is the issue rather than the cold.
Right. Okay.
But some people find that their happy, their temperature just is much smaller, in which they are more comfortable within.
Right. Okay. So moving on now to a different aspect of menopause is brain fog.
Yeah.
Now, this is huge as well. This is another, I feel like with the sleep impacts, the brain fog is another one that so many women do experience.
Mm.
And a lot of women get very frightened that this could be early signs of dementia,
Yep.
that it's not really fog. And, many doctors out there I've heard that are very skeptical about this actually as a symptom. What are your views and what is brain fog?
So, brain fog is a colloquial term that women use, much like baby brain, to describe I don't feel like my brain is working as well as it once did. It's harder to remember words, which is a natural thing that happens as you get older anyway. Doesn't matter whether you're menopausal or not, or male or female. Brain processing does slow down slightly. You kind of peak around 25 and you sort of slowly decline from there on. And it is a colloquial term that people present with. It's not a symptom that a doctor would use as a kind of a clinical indicator, but it is an experience that women describe. What is and let's just say, I'll first of all talk about the theory. What happens when you get disrupted sleep? One night, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. You get emotional effects, you get cognitive effects. Your brain just isn't kind of as swift as it otherwise would be, as if you were getting good, healthy, solid sleep. So the sleep disruption is not just leading to emotional problems, it's leading to these feelings of cognitive kind of fogginess.
Mm-hmm.
Just, I can't remember as easily, I find it harder to pay attention. That's what brain fog is, but it's a very ill-defined term because women are using it to describe quite a subjective experience. In the same way, women are using baby brain to describe this incredibly subjective experience of, I can't kind of remember everything. But in both instances, memory depends on attention, what information you're taking in and what information you are filtering out. And there's a lot going on when you're in midlife.
Yeah.
When you're a bit your sleep's not quite right at midlife, and you've got teenage kids and you've got aging parents and you're at the peak of your career.
There's a lot going on.
I don't believe we have to do everything. We shouldn't be doing everything all at once, but some women have kind of absorbed this idea that women can do everything. Women can do anything. That means they have to do everything. Well, you can't. Exactly. And so perhaps you're going to forget some of the things that you otherwise felt like you should be remembering. And what is really interesting is if we bring all of these women into the research lab, we do exactly the same with women who report baby brain during pregnancy. Let's bring them in and let's do all of the cognitive testing. We'll test women pre-perimenopause, perimenopause, menopause, post-menopause. We're not picking up cognitive decline. Women are not experiencing cognitive decline during menopause when they say they have brain fog. Similarly, when women say they have baby brain in pregnancy and motherhood, we're not picking up cognitive decline. Mm-hmm. So there's a subjective experience and the objective testing isn't picking it up. That is a really good thing. We don't need to go, perhaps the tests were designed by men for men's brains. Let's just celebrate the fact we're not experiencing cognitive decline. Because if we were, then we should start worrying about early onset Alzheimer's. Perhaps this is the first signs of dementia. It is not.
Right.
So we have more of a well-established paradox within the baby brain literature that's been more closely explored. It hasn't been as closely explored in the menopause literature. And right now it's kind of hard to even have a conversation around that because as soon as you want to start unpacking these things, there's a bit of a pushback in terms of you're not honouring women's lived experiences. Actually, I think it's really important to untangle. We've got a subjective experience and the objective measure isn't picking it up. What is going on here? Mm. We're not picking that up. I can talk about what's going on in baby brain because that's been interrogated a bit more closely than in menopause. And in that, I think there's a couple of factors to explain that paradox. One is just well-being. Okay, let's just use the word well-being. When we go in and we ask women, hey, who's got baby brain? Women put their hands up. What's your overall well-being like? What's your sleep like? How socially supported do you feel? How well are you managing stress? Are you able to kind of keep up with all your healthy lifestyle choices? Women who aren't really kind of doing so well with well-being are also not doing so well with reported baby brain, but we're not picking up cognitive decline there. Whereas women who have better overall well-being are less likely to report baby brain. Neither of those women are showing any changes in cognition, but it's a description for a subjective experience. It's not that it doesn't exist, but it's just a word women are using. So why are women using this word about their brains? Well, one theory is, and this is kind of the feminist take on it, and I quite like it, is that since puberty, we've absorbed these ideas that if you've got a brain and then you've got a female body and a female brain, a female body, throw in some hormones, doesn't matter whether they're going up in puberty, cycling during your menstrual cycle, sky high during pregnancy, or kind of starting to fade away during menopause, the combination automatically equals cognitive dysfunction and emotional instability. It's almost as if we sort of experience lack of well-being or not copingness. We blame our brains because our little lady brains aren't meant to function that well. And so baby brain is almost a social issue. It's almost a word women are using to describe their experience of not coping. But there's nothing wrong with them neurologically, but it kind of suits everyone for them to blame their neurology because then no one else needs to help. I don't know whether the same is happening with menopause, whether what women are experiencing is something that we can't yet explain in terms of the brain fog, or whether, again, it's a subjective term that women are using to describe just overall low well-being, and that kind of fogginess is part of that.
I think also both these periods of our lives are very much linked with poor sleep. So menopause and having a baby is both of those periods.
But women are experiencing this through pregnancy as well. So they're reporting the baby brain through pregnancy. And they're not when they may not necessarily be having the disrupted sleep, but, there could be issues with thermoregulation. But I think the fact is it could be the sleep, but the sleep isn't actually impacting cognition.
Right.
The only time it impacts cognition is in some women, in some studies in the third trimester of pregnancy, we've picked things up. But we're not seeing declines in cognition through that menopause kind of phase. And so the latest study that was out, or the first big, let's just call it the first big study, it's only just had its second birthday in sort of June, July this year. And this is from the lab of Lisa Mosconi, who's about to publish a book next March called The Menopausal Brain. I can't wait to get my hands on it. Because people, women's health's always been a bit of a little mumsy niche. No one's really kind of looked at women's health and the brain up until maybe the last 5 or 6 years. So she published a paper 2 years ago that used brain imaging to look to see how women's brains changed across that kind of peri, post-menopause phase. And they compared them to men's brains of the same age. So they could see the impacts of chronological aging versus that hormonal shift. And there's quite a significant neurological transition through the perimenopause. But what's really interesting is the brain adapts. And after the menopause, we see like these changes take place and they all kind of level out because the brain is adaptable and is resilient. Seems to be sometimes more resilient than its owners. The brain is resilient and can adapt to these kinds of changes. And so what we actually see, this is the coolest thing, during perimenopause, we see actually an increase in grey matter in women's brains. So grey matter is the kind of the wrinkly coating on the outside of the brain. Now, that may or may not be a good thing because we see a reduction in grey matter in adolescence, and that maps alongside, that's like this kind of refinement and streamlining, like the cortex kind of gets better at doing what it does, and as it does that, it kind of refines its connections and gets rid of superfluous ones. And we see kind of skill enhancement alongside that slight reduction in cortical volume. And we actually see the same during pregnancy in parts of the brain of women involved with empathy and theory of mind and social cognition. We see the cortex getting slightly thinner as those skills become enhanced. And that's completely driven in pregnancy by pregnancy hormones. In menopause, we're kind of seeing the opposite. We're kind of seeing the brain bouncing back. It's kind of
love it.
It's getting a little bit thicker. The volume's increasing a bit, which is kind of cool because typically what we see later in aging is we see a bit of volume reduction again. So there's something kind of going on there driven by that hormonal shift whereby we're kind of seeing this. So perhaps it's the downloading of wisdom. We don't quite know what's going on there. What's driving that? It's not new neurons, but it's new connections. Something's going on. The brain is adapting. It's resilient.
And can we influence those new connections?
Well, who knows? I mean, we've only known that they're there for the last 2 years. We haven't quite got there yet.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows whether it's just completely biologically driven in a passive impact or whether it's something else. It's so new, we don't know.
Wow.
But the more, I mean, the kind of the overarching idea throughout the lifespan is the more you use your brain and the more you ask of your brain, the more it will kind of reward you by being resilient to kind of aging and illness and disease. So the kind of, you know, more robust your brain is through being used and used in the right way, then, you know, that will pay off. You know, that resilience will kind of get you through to the final years of your life. So, and then there's some other changes we see in the brain. So we've got this kind of increase in cortical volume, which is kind of cool. And we also see these kind of metabolic changes in terms of the ability of neurons to metabolize glucose sort of alters slightly. It kind of gets slightly worse, which fits in with ideas around becoming more susceptible to type 2 diabetes because your glucose metabolism changes. But at the same time, we see this kind of adaptive change in terms of other aspects of metabolism involving ATP production, which is kind of like to do with the energy source of your mitochondria, if you really want to get into your biochemistry. And that kind of acts to counteract that sort of change in glucose metabolism. So we see the brain kind of adapting and changing because it is a resilient organ that we want to kind of keep healthy.
Absolutely.
And then it kind of levels out. And then it's kind of like, okay, I'm cool. I'm a matriarch now. I've got my wisdom to share with the world. And let's kind of carry on for the next 40 decades.
So post menopause, we can expect some great things. We can expect I'm looking forward to that now.
It's not a galloping catastrophe. The brain adapts and then it kind of settles down into its new state. We don't know yet what the impacts of hormone therapy are on that. That hasn't been explored yet. But we do know what the long-term impacts of hormone therapy are in terms of things like Alzheimer's and dementia, etc. But exactly what's causing those structural changes and that reorganization. So we see reorganization in adolescence, we see reorganization in pregnancy, and we're seeing reorganization. We're seeing a neurological transition taking place here again in menopause, and it's not all detrimental.
That's great. That's great. I love the fact that I love a little bit of reorganization.
Yes. Who doesn't love, it's like, you know, tidy room, tidy mind, tidy life.
Exactly. So is there anything that we can do that can determine how we'll experience menopause symptoms?
Well, obviously there's menopause hormone therapy. And that's, you know, people are you know, there's an awful lot of information out there around that at the moment. And I think it's fascinating because I clearly remember 20 years ago, God, it was even longer than that now, about 22 years ago now, in 2001, when the Women's Health studies first came out saying menopause was causing cancer and Alzheimer's and was to everyone's detriment, and around 50% of women globally stopped taking it that were on it. So there is this generation of women who've kind of missed out on that hormone therapy. We've now kind of understood the flaws in that study, and we've got more information, and we now understand the women who were showing the negative consequences were women who were starting menopause hormone therapy far too late, in their 60s and 70s, far too old to be starting. Their bodies have weaned off estrogen, and when you put estrogen back into a body that's weaned off it, then it causes health issues. And we see that in animals. We can do the same. We can wean an animal off estrogen, put an animal into menopause, like a lab rat, and then put it back in after it's weaned off, and you see negative health consequences versus supplementing the estrogen from earlier on. So there's that. And we know that supplementing with hormones at the right time, if you've got this kind of window of age opportunity, and there's also this sort of healthy cell idea that if you've got a healthy brain and body and it's got healthy cells in it, the estrogen will be beneficial.
Right.
So we see a lot of positive health consequences. There are some risks that every woman needs to manage individually. If, for example, you've had estrogen positive breast cancer, so your breast cancer was fed by estrogen, so you're on estrogen blockers, you might not want to be putting estrogen in. Exactly. You need to kind of figure that out. So those women need to work through things with a good women's health specialist that'll help them sort out their risks and benefits. Long term, the consequences, we're just sort of starting to get the data signals coming through, which is super interesting, around menopause hormone therapy and long term risks of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And it does appear it's not causing Alzheimer's or dementia. It's not necessarily preventing it, but it's neutral towards being slightly beneficial. Not enough to take it so you don't get Alzheimer's. That's not going to happen.
No.
But you're not going to get Alzheimer's because you're taking it. Let's just say that.
So there's no need to stop taking it.
Because you're worried about
get the risk. Yeah.
That's what the current guidelines say based on the current evidence. There are some people out there that will hype up the benefits and downplay the risks. That's silly and dangerous and not evidence-based.
Yeah.
Right now, that's what the data signals are saying. Neutral to slightly beneficial is probably the best way to put that. Menopause hormone therapy aside, there is nothing new under the sun. All of the things that we know we should be doing for health and well-being. Sleep. If you haven't got your sleep sorted, it's going to be much harder to get all of the other things sorted. Yeah. So kind of the sleep's kind of the hub of the wheel, right? If you haven't got that, everything else is so much harder. And then it's, your nourishing diet, and it's thinking about how do you buffer and manage stress, because emotional regulation is an enormously important part of all of this. Yeah. And I do think that there gets a point in your life when learning to understand how emotions are created by our brains in response to what is happening in our bodies and the context we're in and our past experiences, and learning to sort of stand back and take a look at how we respond emotionally in good ways and not so good ways is super important. To build resilience, because we don't want to be losing our shit like toddlers and teenagers.
And by this stage, we should really have that self-awareness, I feel, that we know how we react. And then the knowledge, hopefully, to take the steps to, to curb those bits that maybe not so ideal.
Because, we do have agency over that, and we do need to be working towards managing our emotions, because that's what helps us not be depressed and anxious, and we kind of don't want that. That's one part of not being depressed and anxious. So what did I say? So sleep, diet. I'm not going to talk about diet because it's so deathly boring, but everyone knows what they should be doing. We don't need another lunchtime wellbeing webinar on diet, right? And I've got a gin advent calendar going at the moment, so it's not like I am perfect. But you know what? It's so cool to get to the end of every night and open up that little window, and there's my little airline-sized bottle of gin. You've got to have some joy.
I feel like it's that balance, isn't it? It's not about denial, and I feel like we get to this point in our lives, and it's just like, what is working for you? And we all know what works for us. We all know 5 glasses of wine in a night is really not going to work for anybody.
And you feel terrible. So
exactly.
We've got a lifetime of experiences to draw on by now, so kind of draw on them. Exercise is super important, and everyone kind of knows that you're going to do your exercise. Find the thing that works for you. Doesn't matter what it is. Just make sure you're getting some in, and you're also thinking about, bone density and muscle strengthening, because lifting heavy things builds bones. We don't want to deal with osteoporosis and broken hips, etc., etc. And then I think there's this kind of like under-recognized, and I get so frustrated when I keep hearing people saying women don't need to do it all. It's like, haven't we had this conversation 20 years ago? Yeah. Shouldn't we now be talking about, not that we had to do it all, because no, we don't. We don't.
Exactly.
As where do you kind of find the kind of the collective effervescence and the moments of joy that you're sharing with other people, because it doesn't matter anymore, because no one's looking at us. And if you want to dance around wearing stupid clothes and making a complete goose of yourself, just do so if that's what kind of wags your tail.
Exactly.
So finding those things that just, and I'm in a musical theatre group. I can't sing and I can't dance. We're putting on We Will Rock You this year. It's a Queen tribute. There are some super talented people. I went to the auditions and didn't actually audition. I said, you all know I'm just here to sort of shuffle around in the back row of the girls' ensemble, because I just love doing it. It's like being on a sports team without having to play sport, but we dance. And it's just all these middle-aged adults from my suburb that were originally associated with the primary school. We put on these shows every couple of years, and they're just an absolute hoot.
Love it.
Just because, and I don't reckon there's anyone there under 45, And so none of us could care less that when our children come and watch us, they're all cringing. But we're just because why not just throw yourself in and wallow around in the fun of just doing things that are really joyous. And I think some people have lost the ability to
let loose
themselves in that way. Self-care is not about this boring old bubble bath where you're going to get overheated anyway. Doing your nails.
It's so great when you're menopausal.
I think self-care is about finding these things that you just love and selfishly indulge in.
Exactly. I do feel like when we have teenagers, we do have an obligation to embarrass them.
Yeah, absolutely. We are behaving developmentally normally, and so are they. Because when they do all the things that they do that we once did, and we now you kind of worry about them doing the things we once did. But I think if you're not embarrassing them, then clearly you're not trying hard.
Exactly.
You just want them to be going like this.
You need to step up a bit. You need to step up. They need to be shaking their heads and
I think
hiding.
Yeah, I think people are just so busy taking everything so seriously that they've lost that that's just that kind of fun. And
it's the carefree joy. I feel like it's the fact that, like, hey, I don't care what other people are thinking. I want to do this. I'm going to do this, and I may be really bad at it, but that's okay. So I'm having fun.
And it doesn't, and you know, like, you should see how many Spanx us ladies all have to wear under those costumes. Some of us will have 3 pairs on, and it's just hilarious. So just you've got to find that kind of thing, I think, at this point in life, because it lightens the load.
Exactly. And just remove the thinking that we should do something in a certain way. We should do this, we should do that. It's like, do what you want to do. And I feel that there is, like you said, that finding the joy is so crucial. Just sticking back and enjoying it. Like, why not?
Yep.
If you don't do it now, you're never going to do it.
Yeah, so. And we're starting to get to the point where we're losing friends that we would have been at school with, whose lives are cut far too short for whatever reason. And I think anyone in midlife is experiencing that.
Yeah.
Our parents are experiencing it, like they're all, falling like flies. But our generation, I think, you just you get to this point, and I've already lost a friend I went through, kindy, primary and high school with.
Yeah.
My ovarian cancer. I was at her funeral about 6 weeks ago, and her funeral was amazing because she just did the whole thing. There was 90s music playing.
Oh.
It was desperately sad, but it was also fun and funny.
Yeah.
And her message was just like, when you see someone on the street, don't say we should meet up for dinner and then never meet up with them.
Yeah.
Set a date. Actually meet up with them. And I think we forgot during COVID about that as well. I think it gave everyone an excuse to not have to turn up.
Yeah, exactly.
And we need to kind of remember that that's kind of the whole point, really, is sharing.
Yeah. And I think to have those experiences, I know we've been trying to make an effort to, go out and see a band, or go out and do things that are different, like, go and see a show that you wouldn't normally see. And just to have those wider experiences. And I sort of think, by far and away, most of the time you don't regret going, but you do regret not going.
Yeah. And sometimes there's nothing nicer than an early night in bed as well. But
so I do
find, like, if I go out for dinner with my friends now, I've got a girlfriend, and we'll meet just down at our local beach at about 5:30 for dinner. We'll have a few drinks and then roll home. We're in bed by 8. So find those kinds of friends.
But it's doing it in a way that works for you.
Yeah,
that's the thing. Don't not do it, but change it so it works.
Yeah.
So wrapping up, Sarah, can you just give us 3 takeaways, 3 key points that we can keep top of mind?
Oh my goodness!
I think we can have fun and just be joyous and be carefree. That's the best thing for us.
Yeah, I think, well, one is sleep. Like, I think if you haven't got your sleep sorted, everything else is not pointless, but harder. It's so much harder.
Yeah.
So and just remembering we are these organisms that evolved on this planet that spins on its axis as it goes around the sun, and every cell in our body is, biologically wired for light and dark and night and day and the rising and setting of the sun. So we can't fight that. I think, we've got to figure out how to work with it. I think the second thing is what I've been trying to do. Like, we lost our family dog it was around the time my friend died, so it was the same week, about 6 or 7 weeks ago. We had to put him to sleep. and we're getting a new puppy in January because a couple of people said to me, you will always be sad. You will never not be sad about him, but you can be happy about a puppy. And me and my husband have been sitting on the couch by the dog's shrine. We've got his ashes and a collar and we just talk about him all the time. We loved him desperately. We miss him so much. And I said to my husband something like, oh, gosh, well, we didn't even, we're talking about the dog. I said, oh, those were the good old days and we had the dog. And he said, well, it'll be the good old days again soon. And I said, I suppose every day's the good old days. Like it's always the good old days. And I suppose that's about living in the moment, but just trying to make every day the good old days. Because one day you're going to look back and I'm never going to be this young and thin, and I'm not thin, but, again.
No, but it's
looking about the dog. The dog kind of gave me this mindset shift about just trying to have as many experiences as possible.
Yeah.
And you're always going to be looking back and thinking they were the good old days, but the good old days might still be yet to come. So I don't know.
And you can start new
That's
good
really
experiences
badly
now.
formulated short term. Something about dogs. Get a dog. Get a dog.
Just get a puppy, whatever.
Get a puppy. Okay, number 3. What's number? Have I done? I don't know.
I think we've kind of done. We've gone off for a bonus.
If you want to have a glass of wine, just have the bloody glass of wine and enjoy it. And if you don't, have the other thing and enjoy it.
Yeah.
But I think we can kind of make too much meaning of it all.
We don't need the internal fight of should I or I will, and I'll feel guilty, and we don't need that.
No.
I love it. We are so on the same page about these things. So, Sarah, how can people find you?
So my website is Dr Sarah McKay, MCKAY.com, and that's kind of the portal so you can find my social media and my books. I teach professional development courses in neuroscience. I write blogs sometimes, but not as much as I used to. So that's the kind of the portal into all things brain. That's where I explain the brain.
Fantastic. I have to say, I've been reading your book, Women's Brain book.
Yep.
And you were just saying that there will be a new edition out soon.
Well, no, I have the idea that I should write a new edition.
Okay, there will be.
Publishers Publishers haven't got my submission yet. They might say no.
In the meantime, this one's a great read. But what I absolutely love is you write like you speak. It is just such an easy to read, easy to understand book. Normally you think, okay, I'm not going to necessarily pick up a book about neuroscience, as fascinating as it is. Mm-hmm. It may be, not your typical bedtime read, but this is great. I love it. I love the tone. It's friendly. It's readable. It's easy to understand, and I highly recommend it to everyone.
Thank you. That's lovely praise. I appreciate that so much.
So we look forward to the next one coming out too.
Actually, there might be a Brain Health for Dummies coming out. The For Dummies brand?
Yes.
Do you know they still exist? They're still a thing. There might be one of them in the works. I don't know. I've got too many things I could do.
So many ideas. I love it.
So many ideas.
What keeps the brain young and healthy.
Exactly. I mean, that's what you've got to keep challenging it. Keep asking of it.
Yes.
And it will deliver.
Fantastic. I love it. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being on Midlife.
You're so welcome.
It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, share and subscribe so you can stay updated with more from Midlife Unraveled. To see more Midlife Unraveled, follow us at midlifeunraveled.com or at Midlife Unraveled on Facebook and Instagram. We'll see you soon.